Hello, hello. Just waiting for a few people to drop into the stream here. All right. We already got one like. How thrilling. All right. Well, why don't we get started? Hello and welcome to the Daily Faded. I'm Hetz. This is where we get faded daily and talk about news and politics of the day. Thank you for watching. Welcome and solidarity as we go through this strange global crisis together. Solidarity and staying home. And of course, at the outset, I want to express gratitude for all the workers on the front lines, the doctors, the nurses, the health professionals, the city workers, the grocery and pharmacy workers. Everyone who is putting their life on the line for all of us. I'm going to run through a couple of things here just to get started. Please smoke with me or drink with me, whatever you prefer. COVID-19. Worldwide, we are up to 789,229 cases, which is up over 8% from yesterday. There have been 38,806 deaths attributed to the coronavirus, which is up over 10%. And in the United States, we have a whopping 163,882 confirmed cases, which is up over 14% from yesterday, and 3,167 deaths, which is up over 21% today. Every one of them a tragedy. 192 out of 195 nations are now infected, although Trump still can't get that right. He still says 150 nations. Who knew there were 150 nations? Anybody who's had a geography class or knows what Wikipedia is knows how many nations there are, Trump. I do want to correct something that I said last week. I said last week that the so-called CARES stimulus bill did not have any money in it for the post office. I believe I said that on here last week. That was incorrect. It actually has $10 billion for the U.S. Postal Service. That's probably less than what they need. Because as I said last week, arguing about the Postal Service is always an argument between the left and the right, or the so-called left and the right. I saw today the first infant COVID-19 death was reported in Illinois. I don't know if that's the first one worldwide. I assume not. I assume that's the first one in America. But and a 17-year-old died in the hospital after having been refused treatment at a healthcare clinic because he didn't have insurance. So anecdotally, we see that it's not just old people who succumb to this disease. Just some randoms here. Jeff Bezos is crowdfunding to help his workers. Despite being the richest person in the world, he has got a fund online to raise money for Amazon workers to get through this crisis. He doesn't pay any taxes, and he's the richest man in the world, and he's asking us to contribute to his workers. Macy's is going to furlough most of its workers, it looks like. Thank you, stimulus bill. That helped keep all the Macy's people employed. I think it was something like 150,000. And United has said that they'll have layoffs coming in the third or fourth quarter. So after we get through this and after we get our money, we're still going to lay some people off. And the New York Times is reporting that healthcare premiums are going to go up as much as 40% next year as a result of the pandemic. Reason number 75 that a pandemic shows us Medicare for all is a better system than a private health insurance system. The Trump administration is also relaxing EPA regulations and telling corporations that they can self-test regarding EPA regulations, and that until whenever, they didn't actually set a timeline on it, they're not going to have to account for environmental standards. So that's great. Just an excuse for a Republican administration to slash the EPA. There is some good news, which is that some Americans have a way to deal with their anxiety. 3 in 10 Americans who use cannabis say they've been using it more than usual in the past 2 weeks. I think I've actually been using it less than usual in the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure. 36% say their habits haven't changed. I'm surprised those numbers, the 28% is not a higher number. I am not going to go through every detail of Trump's press conference today because there wasn't much that was worth reporting on. As I'm sure you know, they announced yesterday that they're extending the social distancing guidelines until April 30th. Although in the same press conference, they also said we might be able to get back to normal by June. So maybe we're going through May with this thing as well. Who knows? We'll see. But he kept talking about keeping the numbers of deaths. Again, this was yesterday and then repeated again today. That the number of deaths could be up to 2.2 million, which of course is the figure for if we did nothing. At least I think that's what that figure is. And that's the number that Fauci gave Trump to force the decision to extend the deadlines to April 28th to April 30th. Now, there were also polls. One poll found that 58% of the country thought it was a good idea for people to shelter in place, whereas some number in the 30s thought it was better to just isolate people with the disease. And Pew found that 9 out of 10 people agree with social distancing policies. But this whole thing about 2.2 million deaths, now Trump is going to brag that anything under 2.2 million deaths is fantastic. They said it was going to be 2.2 million, but I'm the man, I'm the one, I did it. Incredible things, tremendous. And we only had 1 million deaths. Aren't I great? God forbid, I hope that doesn't happen. They ordered a travel advisory for New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. After talking about a complete lockdown of those states, they just went with a travel advisory. Today, they brought out a lot of business leaders who just went up and stroked off Trump's ego. One of them said this was great because people were going to have more time to read the Bible. I'm not shitting you. And then there's the combination of journalists trying to do a real job and, right-wing sycophant journalists asking questions like, do you agree with the Texas and Ohio policy that bans abortion as a non-essential surgery during these times? Which he actually didn't answer. Surprise, surprise. Also, Trump went off on a reporter who asked a very sensible question about the number of tests we've done per capita, because Trump keeps trumpeting that we've done more tests than any other country in the world and what a great thing it is. But per capita, we've done fewer tests than a lot of countries. And we've done fewer tests than South Korea per capita. So it was a perfectly valid question. And he, of course, accused her of asking a nasty question and got into a fight with her, because that's how our president behaves. But it could be worse. This is our could be worse category. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, downplayed COVID-19, told people that they shouldn't be too worried about it, and that they should drink shots of vodka and they should go into the sauna to fight the virus. Of course, going into the sauna, if you have the virus with another person, could get them infected and cause them to die. So that's not necessarily a great idea. The Hungarian parliament passed a bill that gives the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban unlimited power, proclaims state of emergency without a time limit, rule by decree, suspension of parliament, no elections. Spreading fake news and rumors can get you up to 5 years in prison, and leaving quarantine can get you up to 8 years in prison. Naomi Klein has written and talked a lot about ecofascism. And ecofascism is, and Orban is exactly the type of person she talks about when she talks about ecofascists, which is, combining fascism with an anti-immigrant, anti-internationalist, whatever that means, rhetoric that that says, the solution to the climate change problem is to close the borders and blame it on other people, and just deal with it, and just struggle for yourself. Climate denial plus fascism equals ecofascism, and it just becomes another excuse for fascism. So in the case of what Hungary has done, this is pandemic fascism, and this is an EU country. So that's a problem. Also, today, we heard about Instacart and Amazon workers on Staten Island striking for safer working conditions, paid leave for all, and hazard pay. We've seen frontline city workers in cities doing wildcat strikes for the right to have more protections as they're out there working for the city and working for the people. And of course, we've seen an expansion of labor rights for grocery store employees here in Los Angeles. They've been given the right to paid time off, paid family and sick leave, the right to adjust their schedule if they've got children to care for, the right to stay home if they may have been infected or are infected, and the right to become full-time before they hire anyone new if you are a part-time worker. So those are all things that grocery store workers should already have, because those are all things that all workers should have. So these are the kinds of things that need to be made permanent after this is over. And this is where, this pandemic serves as an inflection point for the country. Do we go fascist? Do we go into social democracy? who knows where we're headed. But I did a video today about a general strike, and I do think that everyone being away from work right now is good practice for a general strike. I do think there's going to come a time in American life when enough Americans are sick and tired of the conditions they're living in their own country that there will be a call for a general strike, and it will happen. I don't know if it'll be next year or in 10 years or in 20 years. But if we don't get the reforms that we're looking for, the material conditions of so many Americans will continue to go down. And as material conditions go down and erode, that's what leads to revolution. That's what leads to things like a general strike, like the Yellow Vest movement in France. So there was a lot of heads exploding on Twitter today, on left-wing Twitter and on left-wing YouTube, about a Politico article about AOC. And the article says AOC breaks with Bernie on how to lead the left. Now, AOC does a lot of hit pieces that are basically just smear attack pieces. They do it all the time. And I think this is actually more of that than it is what people are pretending it is, which is, look at how AOC capitulates to the Democratic establishment and plays nice with the establishment. And she hasn't said anything mean about Nancy Pelosi in 4 months. And there are 2 quotes in it, one of James Carville and another from Neera Tanden, where they say positive things about AOC. So people are like, see that? Neera Tanden said something nice about her. She must be, whatever she's doing, it's wrong because Neera Tanden says it's good. Same with James Carville. A lot of people on the left really despise these people, and I don't particularly like. I don't like either of them. But just because they're saying something nice about AOC does not mean that AOC is now suddenly not a progressive, not a democratic socialist, not a leftist. And she's had some changes in her staff. I don't think that really accounts. I don't think that really matters at all. Even though Corbin Trent and Shoykat Chakrabarty, the 2 people who were part of her campaign and part of Justice Democrats who went on to work in her congressional office, they've moved on. And Corbin Trent is actually on the Bernie campaign now. But just because she's hired new people and they have experience with centrist Dems, one of them also has experience working on Cynthia Nixon's campaign. So that's pretty far outside of the establishment. So, all kinds of people are, canceling AOC today because of this article. And I feel like this is coming from a crowd who loves to point at a Politico article that has Neera Tanden and James Carville bitching about Bernie Sanders. And they go, oh, it's an establishment rag. It's a hit job. It's smears. So it has no credibility. But this comes out and they treat it like it has complete and total credibility. I don't think it is particularly credible. She's a different person and a different politician than Bernie Sanders. And railing against the Democratic establishment is not the only way to move forward the progressive agenda. Clearly, a lot of people take some level of offense when they hear people railing against the Democratic establishment because they think, well, I'm a Democrat. That must mean me. which is obviously not what anyone means when they say democratic establishment. In fact, they don't even really mean voters, other than a few very specific people that they're talking about. When they say democratic establishment, they mean donors, and they mean lobbyists, and they mean leaders, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bidens, the so ons and so forths, the Neurotandons, the James Carvilles. So, and we've run the Bernie playbook 2 electoral seasons in a row, and it hasn't worked either time. So what the article didn't say and didn't show was it didn't show a single policy position that AOC has changed on. It didn't show a single example of her changing her language on immigration or Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. There wasn't a single instance of it. So I don't care what Neurotandon says. I don't care what James Carville says. Maybe there's a way to do this so-called leftist project or just these policies. Maybe there's a way to do them. Maybe it isn't about a leftist project. Maybe it's just about these policies. And maybe there is a way to play nice. If she started accepting corporate PAC money, then I would have a real problem with that, because I do think that's unacceptable. And I think that has to be made unacceptable. But to just take Bernie's playbook and try and repeat that playbook over and over again is probably Einstein's definition of insanity. So I think people who are dismissing AOC, now, the one criticism against her is that she only endorsed 2 Justice Democrats this year, and I do wish she had endorsed more Justice Democrats. I also understand that it's a lot harder to do when you are when you're talking about colleagues who you have to work with, who can be part of a group of people working against you. It's a different calculus than just being on the outside and saying we're the Justice Democrats and we're coming in, So, and Justice Democrats still has my complete support and faith at this point. I think they're doing a great job. But she did endorse 2, and one of them won. And the other one is Jessica Cisneros. She endorsed Marie Newman, who beat Dan Lipinski. And she endorsed Jessica Cisneros, who almost beat Henry Cuellar in Texas. And I think maybe we'll see that rematch in 2 years. So all I'm saying is that it's complex, and I don't know what our next step is electorally. We have to continue to try and get people like Marie Newman elected, of course, and Cori Bush in Missouri, and Morgan Harper in Ohio. These are all people worth looking up and sending them $5 if you can afford it, because it's even harder for them to campaign when they can't knock on doors. And all of this, I want to do a shout out to Kyle Kalinske, because he did a great video about left-wing rhetoric, where he showed, I think it was Andrea Mitchell, saying, she was talking about the Defense Production Act, and she says, it's not socialist, it's not communist, it's American. And then there was someone else, another talking head, saying, all of a sudden, since the pandemic, I am suddenly retweeting Bernie Sanders and AOC all the time, because they're just right, and it's the right thing to do for America. And Kyle Kalinske was like, oh, got it, note taken. All we have to do is drape everything in patriotism. Stop talking about democratic socialism and start talking about Americanism. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I'm not going to personally stop talking about democratic socialism because I'm interested in it. But do we need to run a democratic socialist? Or do we run a patriot in the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr., a patriot in the tradition of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By the way, getting back to the AOC thing for a second, FDR ran as a regular Democrat, not as a social democrat, not as a democratic socialist, and not as an extreme progressive. But once he got in office, he realized that those were the policies that were needed to get the American people through the Great Depression. So it wasn't, the movement was there because the trade unionist movement was there, and the Communist Party movement was there, and the Socialist Party's movement was there, and they were all a sizable part of the Democratic voting electorate. And they made it very clear to FDR that they would not be there for him if he did not do the New Deal, in essence. So I'm not. I'm just not canceling AOC when there's more important people to cancel. More than 3,000 people in the U.S. have died from the coronavirus, according to a CNN tally. Yeah, I know. I already reported that, CNN. Jesus Christ, they got to catch up. CNN is behind the game. Anyway, in other news, I'm going to skip that. Go a little bit to the election, but we're not going to stray too far from coronavirus. ABC News reported a poll that Biden has consolidated his support, and he's still leading against Trump by a couple of points. But they polled strong enthusiasm among supporters. And the strongly enthusiastic supporters of Joe Biden number at 24% of his supporters, whereas 53% of Trump's supporters strongly support him, have strong enthusiasm. This is the lowest on record for a Democratic candidate in 20 years since they started asking the question. And McCain and Romney both had similar numbers. McCain at 17% strong enthusiasm and Romney at 23% strong enthusiasm among their supporters. So Biden has those good, strong McCain style, Romney style numbers. Hillary Clinton had more support, I think in the 30s. Also in this poll, there was a bunch of other things they polled that most of it was relatively uninteresting and nothing new. But there was a poll, it did say that 15% of Bernie Sanders supporters said they would vote for Trump over Biden. And of course, Twitter went crazy about this. And centrist blue check marks, corporate tools started demanding that Bernie Sanders start campaigning for Joe Biden immediately to get that 15% to vote for Joe Biden, which, it's not, it was 12% in 2016. There's nothing you can do about it, and it's a low number because when Clinton's supporters were polled, 28% said they would vote for the Republican instead of Obama. And when Obama's supporters were polled, 19% said they would vote for the Republican instead of Hillary Clinton. So this is much ado about nothing. It really doesn't matter. Although this issue of enthusiasm, strong enthusiasm among supporters being so low, that is an issue. That is definitely an issue. So I have one last thing to talk about. One last thing to talk about, but I needed to increase the difficulty level there for just a moment. Stoner cough, not coronavirus cough. So Biden was on TV today and was asked about, he had said that we need to make investments in public health. And they said, so are you reconsidering your opposition to Medicare for all? And he said, no, single payer will not solve this problem at all. Which gives me a reason to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about for, I don't know, 2 weeks. All the way back at the last debate, this came up. And Bernie said something to the effect of, with this crisis, we see now more than ever that we need single payer healthcare. And Biden made one of the comments that I think will be one of the stupidest comments outside of Trump world. This will be one of the stupidest comments that anyone made about this thing. Joe Biden said in the debate that having single payer didn't help Italy at all when it came to the coronavirus. And I think the fact that they have single payer there is actually not relevant to how much they're suffering. Perhaps cuts in healthcare programs due to austerity, the likes of which is championed by Joe Biden, austerity from the EU. I would say that would be more likely to be the problem. Joe Biden knows that countries with universal health care are better protected against a pandemic, and he's simply lying when he says that that's not the case. Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, which all flatten their curve very quickly, single-payer countries with vibrant public health sectors. Also, there are several factors about Italy, because they were talking about Italy specifically. There are several things about Italy that make it more vulnerable to the coronavirus. One is that a lot of Italians smoke, which gives them immunocompromised respiratory systems. I don't know, something like that. I'm not a doctor. The families have they're more likely in Italy than in other countries to have multi-generational households where younger people are frequently interacting with older people, with parents and grandparents. So while the young people were getting it and not necessarily getting that sick, they were inadvertently spreading it to their loved ones, who they saw on a regular basis because of the culture, the family culture in Italy. Now, Joe Biden just ignores all of these things and just says, oh, universal single payer didn't help them at all. I don't know what's going to happen, but in a couple of days, New York could look as bad as northern Italy. And it could look a hell of a lot worse. I don't know. I look at the Javits Center being turned into a hospital, and I look at the Comfort arriving in New York, and I hope that there are enough beds. I hope that they can manage and get through it. But one of the things about Medicare for All is investing in public health infrastructure, opening more community health centers and providing care outside of the city centers. And look, it's the only country in the world where people are habituated to not go see the doctor, even though they have health insurance. They're habituated to not go see the doctor because they can't afford the copay or the deductible. And that leads to people who need treatment not getting treatment, people who need diagnosing not getting diagnosed. And that puts us all in greater jeopardy. And we've seen stories already of people who came out of the hospital from COVID-19 and had a $34,000 bill that they didn't have any way to pay for because they were uninsured. So, you know, when Joe Biden talks about Medicare for all, he's just gaslighting. He knows it's more affordable. He knows it's more effective. But he's bought and paid for by the insurance companies and big pharma. It's that simple. So, folks were being gaslit from the left and the right. Thank you very much for hanging out with me tonight, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace out. Stay well. Stay safe. Solidarity.